The church in America faces an uncertain financial future, and that means many pastors face an uncertain financial future as well. But what if that didn't have to be true for you or your church? What if there was a way that you could future-proof your church and personal income? Well, I believe there is, and we're going to talk about that today in this episode of the More Than a Pastor Show. Let's get started. Hello, my friend. Welcome to the More Than a Pastor Show. I'm Rich Avery, your host. This is the show where we help pastors grow your income and build financial security. We help you take your skills, experience, and ministry know-how and leverage them into sustainable income outside the church through a business or a side hustle that's right for you, so you can serve God and provide for your family no matter what. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today. It really means a lot that you're here, and I'm always grateful for the opportunities that we have to spend time together and to dive into some of these issues about the future of the church and how churches will be funded and the future for pastors and how they can grow income outside the church. Well, in the last episode, I promised I would be talking about a new service or some services I was going to be providing to help pastors and churches. It was something new that had dawned on me as I was preparing for my last episode. And in the last episode, we talked about how one of the easiest and quickest ways to earn extra money is to provide a service of value for other people. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to just look at some of the problems that exist and look at our own passions or skills or experiences, and then just see where the overlap is. And if there are needs, and if there are issues that are happening, if there are problems in our area, and we have some skills or talents or experiences or passions around those areas, then we've already got a ready-made market. We've already got the need or the problem. We've got people that want to solve that problem, and we then have some tools that we can bring to bear to help provide a solution for those problems. You know, sometimes people that have a vision to solve a problem don't necessarily have the expertise or the experience to solve the problem themselves. And it's cool that they see the issue and they want to help do something about it, but sometimes it can take a lot of money and a lot of time if they don't already have the experience to create the products or the solutions to help meet those needs and solve those problems. But if you're a person that sees a vision or they see an opportunity and a need and a problem there, and you already have skills, talents, and experiences you can bring to bear to help solve those, well, you're already like halfway there. You've already got the tools and resources you need, and then it's just packaging things, putting things together in a way that will help you to be able to meet the market where it is and be able to drum up a business and get people to hire you to provide the solutions for their problems. And that's really where I found myself here in the last month or two. And I've been thinking about, in preparation for that last episode 61, I had been thinking about, okay, what are all the skills and talents and experiences that I have? And what are some of the crises or some of the needs or the problems right now that I could tap into to help generate more income for our family and for the business? And one thing that dawned on me that I think was a message the Lord had spoken to me was to take a slight pivot from what I've been doing with More Than a Pastor so far. And if you've been with me for a while, or maybe you're new for the first time, my vision for launching More Than a Pastor was born out of what I felt were some major sea changes or major shifts that were going to be happening, that were already beginning to happen in the church, especially in America, and that will be rapidly expanding into the church here in the months and just the next few years, where I believe many more churches will struggle to survive on the traditional church funding model of tithes and offerings. If we think about the history of the church over the last 50, 75, 100 years, churches have been sustained on tithes and offerings. And there was a time when churches, in many situations, like people just knew to tithe, like it was a value that people did. They came to church, they gave, they tithed, maybe because their parents did or their grandparents did, and that's just what they did then as a result. But today is a different day. We're not really seeing people tithing at that same percentage just because than before. And nowadays, millennials, Gen Zers, even Gen Xers and baby boomers, they're looking more for reasons to give and connections that they want to make with the churches or the organizations that they're a part of. And if they don't feel that close connection, if they don't feel that relationship or that passion, they're less likely to give. And it's not just because God wants me to give my 10% or because God loves a cheerful giver, I need to give. They're looking for other reasons to give. And you and I may disagree or think, well, that's a problem or shame on them or whatever. We can poo-poo that, or we can decry that that's where we are today, or we can just accept that that is where we are today and to realize that there are some things that we can do to help tap into that, to tap into that passion or that interest that people have, or to help grow that connection more. And maybe where we're at today isn't all that bad. And maybe it's actually going to be a blessing, and there's some things that we can do to help to change this landscape that we find ourselves in. So if you think maybe a generation or two ago it was fairly easy for churches to be supported 100% on their tithes and offerings, I think that day is past us for many churches, and many churches will continue to struggle coming out of COVID to survive on that traditional model of tithes and offerings. And so that's why I had the vision to launch More Than a Pastor, because I said the church landscape is changing. Churches in many situations will struggle to survive on tithes and offerings. Many churches will be getting smaller as fewer people are engaging in church, especially among the younger generations. And so because of that, many pastors will need to look for work outside the church. Many pastors who have been full-time in their ministry, and I know they've always been part-time, bivocational or co-vocational pastors. I know they've always existed, and they've always been church planters who have been bivocational or co-vocational. But what if you've been full-time for the last 20, 30, 40 years in your ministry, and now the landscape in your church is changing, and now your income, the church's income has declined 30%, 50%. What would you do? What if the church came to you and said, I'm sorry, Pastor, we don't have the money to pay you this month, this week, and we don't know when we will be able to provide your full salary again? So my vision had been, if churches are going to be in that situation, if many more churches are going to be facing those struggles, then how to help churches pivot, then how to help pastors pivot and create income outside their church. And many more pastors are catching that vision and the realization that they do have other skills and talents that aren't always being used to their full extent in their pastoral ministry, and they could do those things in the marketplace in a way that could create extra income for their family. Or even many pastors are catching the vision that they'd like to be able to self-fund their income through working in the marketplace. And so then the church doesn't have to worry about paying them or their full salary. Then the pastor isn't dependent upon the church in case the church financial situation continues to struggle or even get worse. And so my vision, my thought had been, churches are going to struggle in the future, and therefore pastors should create income outside the church. And I still 100% believe that those things both are true. But also, the Lord has helped me to realize that there's also some things we can do to help churches who are struggling financially, that there are things that He has gifted me with, experiences and talents and skills from the past that I could tap into to help churches and pastors find more ways to grow the giving and generosity within their churches, and also to help churches look at alternative revenue streams if giving is going to decline, if they won't be able to survive on tithes and offerings alone. Then how do we develop alternative revenue, not just for the pastor, but for the church? How can the church look for ways to create income through its facilities, through its land, through its programs or its staff? How can the church create other revenue streams that can help fund the ministry if tithes and offerings won't be able to cover things like they had in the past? And what if the church is losing the younger generations? And I'm speaking in generalities. Your church may be different. Your mileage may vary. But if in general we're seeing more people disengage, if we're seeing fewer people stay in church, then are there strategies that we can use to help re-engage them and to help them grow their heart and passion? Because for many of them, they're not leaving Christ. For many of them, they're not leaving faith. They're leaving an institutional expression of the faith that they believe isn't valid anymore. And so if you're in an institutional type church, if you're in a church where people feel like that's not what they want to be a part of anymore, then how can we help make some shifts? How can we help churches and pastors move in a different direction that doesn't negate your faith, that doesn't cause you to water things down? But are there institutions? Are there rules and regulations? Are there things that have been set up that are pushing people away that don't need to be there? And are there ways that we can smooth some of those things out, that we can make it easier for people to stay engaged in your church or in the church? And so over the last couple of months, I felt the Lord say, Rich, you've had a lot of experiences in fundraising and growing generosity in churches in the U.S. and overseas. You've had experiences in raising money through leading a nonprofit and in working in the church and being a pastor and launching a campus and being involved in church multiplication efforts like that. You've had missions experience and you've been involved in helping churches overseas to launch and to grow and to find some ways to become more sustainable locally through their own tithes and offerings and other income, alternative income opportunities there. And so I felt the Lord saying, don't just think about how to help pastors create their own income outside the church, although that's important. But there are things that you could do to help churches right now, because not every pastor is geared toward entrepreneurship. Not every pastor is going to want to create income outside their church or know how to do that or think it's for them, which I've talked about a lot on this show. But pretty much every pastor in every church needs to find ways to grow their income, needs to find ways to continue to engage the younger generations, needs to find ways to pursue alternative revenue streams outside the church. And Rich, maybe you are uniquely poised and experienced to be able to help churches and pastors do just that. And so over the last couple of months then, I've taken that thought and that idea, and I thought, okay, here's another way then that I could provide more services for pastors and churches, because I've always had this passion about helping pastors create income outside the church. But what if I also found ways to help churches and pastors grow their church income and find ways to produce alternative revenue outside their church? That could be a whole different line of services that I could provide that would meet a real need among pastors and churches today, and that would help provide more of a financial blessing for our family, as I could create products and services and coaching and guidance resources around those things. And so that's what I've been thinking about here over the last couple of months. And so I thought, I don't want to just go out and begin to create products or services and put myself out there to promote these things without really knowing exactly what some of the needs are, what some of the questions are that pastors and churches are asking around these issues. I mean, I feel like I have a good pulse on things, but I really wanted to have fresh conversations around these subjects. And so I got this idea from Justin Janowski. He is an awesome podcaster and coach who helps Christian coaches grow their influence and their income. And he's got a website and a podcast called Faith to Influence, and his website is spelled faith and then the number 2 and then influence.com. And a couple of months ago, Justin had an episode on his show sharing an idea that he got about having 100 cups of coffee. And this idea he got was from another podcaster named Jason Elkins. And Jason had the idea, I think it was a few years ago. He wanted to kind of launch into something new, but before he did, he wanted to have 100 cups of coffee with 100 leaders in 100 days. And he thought that would help him to get his hands more on the pulse or the needs that were happening in his target market, in the people that he wanted to influence, and it would help grow his connections with people that maybe could be clients of his someday, or could be referral partners who could recommend people that he could get in touch with. And it would just help him to just put himself out there and get in the habit of having conversations with people and talking about his products and services and ways that he could help, and seeing if there's a match, if there are people that have a need that he can fill, and if he can help present that in such a way that they will want to hire him to help provide the solutions that they're looking for. And so Justin shared how this was a powerful concept for him to just realize that the power of conversations, and not always to have conversations with people that you want to try to sell to, but just be open to conversations with anyone. Just broaden your approach of who you can talk to about your idea, and share your idea and bounce it off of other people and have them share their thoughts, their experiences. And maybe, yes, you'll find that there's a match and that they'll want to tap into what you're doing and hire you to provide a solution for them. Or maybe they can refer you to someone else that they think could really use what you are doing. And so I took that idea that Justin had learned from Jason, and I applied that for myself. And I did not want to have 100 cups of coffee with 100 people in 100 days. But I did say, how many conversations can I have, like in the next 2 weeks or the next 3 weeks? And so I reached out and sent emails to 30 pastors that I know in my area that are part of my denomination, the Wesleyan Church. And I said, hey, can I pick your brain? Here, I've got some thoughts and ideas about how churches maybe are going to be struggling in their income through the traditional model of tithes and offerings. And maybe we'll have to look at alternative revenue streams, or maybe even pastors looking at creating their own income outside the church. So I would just like to get your thoughts and your feedback on A, what's happening in your church, how are things going with your giving and in generosity within your church, and B, are you seeing these things? Are you seeing that tithes and offerings are going down? C, are you kind of losing generations? Are you finding that people are not as generous anymore, or certain segments are not, or are you feeling like this segment is not giving at all, or like maybe it's young generations, maybe it's families that are struggling financially, or is it new attenders? Are they like the slowest to begin to give? So I just wanted to ask those questions, and then find out, have they had any solutions or any things that they've been doing that have helped to grow their income or diversify their income through alternative revenue streams, or even considering having pastors create income outside the church. So I just wanted to get fresh ideas and connections with people. I wasn't coming to sell them anything. I was coming to learn and to ask questions and just sit there and listen. And I'll tell you, I think I've had 12 of these conversations so far from these 30 pastors I've reached out to. I've got some more set up that they couldn't do right away because I was reaching out in the later part of the summer. Kids are getting ready for back to school, things like that, or families were doing their last vacations before school. And so I wasn't able to have the conversations with all of them. And I still want to reach out to many more pastors beyond this first group of 30. But I was just blown away by their generosity, by their willingness to connect and share, by some of the struggles that some of them are going through, and some of the dire circumstances that some of them face. Also was blessed to hear about how some of them are doing very well financially, and how some are even growing their income beyond where they were before, and some are seeing growth after COVID that's really remarkable. It's a amazing work of God that He's doing in their church, but others are struggling. Others are trying to find their way, and others, things are okay, like things maybe are even, but they're realizing that even if they're even, they're behind. And I wonder if you know what I mean, or maybe you can figure it out pretty quick. Because if you think about inflation right now, they're saying that the average American family is spending $500 to $700 more per month on things than we did before a couple of years ago. And that means every church is paying more as well for utilities, for fuel costs, for food, for events, and maybe even more for staffing costs. I hope your church is giving you a cost of living increase. If not, maybe we can talk about how you can encourage your church to do that. I know not every church can, not every organization can. But we find ourselves, so even if churches are even if their giving is the same as it's been, that's not good if the expenses are up 15 to 20%. The giving hasn't grown to match that. And so then churches are needing to bridge that gap as well. So I was just so blessed to be able to have these conversations and to have some confirmation and some affirmation from the Lord through these pastors that I'm onto something, I think, in terms of helping churches be able to figure out how to grow generosity within their church, how to engage segments of the church family that aren't giving or haven't given at the level they had before, or how to keep people engaged, younger generations or people that are leaving the church. What are some giving strategies that could even keep people engaged in being a part of your church by involving them more in giving in certain specific ways, and how to help churches grow alternative revenue, and even just begin to think about it. Like for many churches, that's not on their radar whatsoever. That's just not what we do. We don't have businesses. We don't grow income. We ask people for money through tithes and offerings, and that's how we live and survive and do the work God's called us to do. And if that's you, that worked great for a very long time. But what will you do when it stops working for you? And I just think that many more churches are going to be in that situation where it's not going to be working for them anymore. My heart has been broken when I've heard about pastors who have left churches and churches who have had to close because the numbers of people went down, the giving went down, and they just couldn't sustain themselves anymore. I have a friend who is part of a mission board, and he's responsible, like in his denomination, when churches close, he's the one that kind of takes them and figures out, okay, how can we get this relaunched? How can we find a new pastor to come in? How can we help provide some funds to help get this going again? And I just wonder how many more churches will be in that situation where the old models are no longer working, and are we willing to look at some new models that can work to help provide sustainability for our church, or do we just give up, let it close, and then hope someday someone will come and do something new that we weren't willing or able to do before? You know, one thing that really touched me in a couple of the conversations I had with pastors here over the last month or so, some of them have been pastoring in their church for 25 and 30 years as the lead pastor. And they're not ready to retire yet, but they know that day is coming. And so they're already looking for who's that next generation leader to be able to take over. But they also have a heart for, how can I leave my church more financially stable, more financially sustainable before I retire? Like, it would be attractive to say, okay, maybe my day is done and I'm going to move on and ride off into the sunset, and good luck to whoever comes next to deal with the problems and the situations that are here. But these pastors, they were saying, I want to leave this church better than I found it in, and even better than how I found it. And even if I've been pastoring for 30 years and the landscape is changing, I want to begin to wrestle. I want to help our board to wrestle with these questions. What does the future of our church look like? Will we need to be able to sustain a full-time pastor still, or will we need a co-vocational pastor in the future? Are there alternative revenue streams we can begin to pursue now, or are we not going to be thinking in those terms? And so I've been so blessed that these pastors are willing to ask those hard questions and be able to lead their board and their congregation into those sorts of things now. And I just wonder how many other pastors out there are like that, or how many pastors need to be inspired and encouraged that, yes, you don't have to just leave and say the old model worked for me, and it's going to need a new person to be able to do a new model. But what if there were some things you could do, even if you're an old dog, so to speak? Can we teach you some new tricks that can help you? And I don't mean tricks in a negative way. You know the phrase, teach an old dog new tricks. Are there new methods? Are there new wineskins that you can begin to adapt now that will help your church? Will you be willing, Pastor, to make some hard decisions and some hard choices and lead your board in that way to get where your church needs to be going forward? Do you care that much about your church that you'll leave it in a better place, Lord willing, than as you came to it? And will you help your church be future-proofed and able to exist and live on long beyond you? And if you don't know how to begin, or what sorts of questions to ask, or even how to begin to think about those things, that's where I feel God has gifted me and equipped me with some strategies and some ways to help guide churches and pastors, and some assessments and things they can do to begin to brainstorm and think about those things, and how to help churches be future-proofed and be able to grow income outside the church, also be able to grow income within the church to engage people that aren't giving. I think there are some meaningful strategies, not to get more from people, but to help get more for people, help show them how their giving grows them as a disciple, makes a difference in their own lives, not just in the church and in the mission of the church. I just think many churches are missing the boat and how to connect. Don't just give to the church because the church needs the money to do its thing, but how to help connect with the passion that the individual people have to see lives transformed. I just think there are some unique and creative ways we can do that to grow giving among the people that are already there, some low-hanging fruit that can be addressed and can be picked, and then how to help grow the next generation as generous givers to what God wants to do through the mission of your church, and then pursue alternative revenue streams outside the church, or that the church can pursue that's beyond tithes and offerings, and then to help pastors create income outside the church through their own business or side hustle. So I feel like the Lord is broadening my message and my approach for More Than a Pastor. And so that has left me thinking, okay, well, how do I word what I do then? Like I think I've had a really nice introduction here to the podcast each episode. I think I've had really nice messaging and branding in terms of how I want to help pastors grow their income outside the church. But now I have to think through, okay, how do I word helping churches grow their income and generosity, pursuing alternative revenue streams, and helping pastors create income? That's my task next, is to begin to think those things through and to kind of streamline my messaging and branding. But I just am saying these things to let you know that the More Than a Pastor show is going to be changing and broadening a little bit then as I talk more about those topics and have more guests that will speak to those issues. And I really wish when I had those conversations with those pastors, I wasn't coming to sell anything, and I didn't want to bring a camera and record those conversations because I just wanted to have a real, personal, genuine conversation with them. But I left those saying, oh, I wish we could have recorded those conversations, because every pastor had a golden nugget, had some amazing insight or a message from the Lord or just something that was just meaningful that I think every pastor needs to hear and experience. And so I'm looking forward to being able to have some of those pastors on the show and be able to, we can't recreate the magic, if you will, of that moment, but I can say, I heard you say this when we met. Tell me more about that. And I hope that I can be able to share some of their insights and their stories. And I want to be able to broaden that and have more stories as well. But Pastor, if you're in a church where you're wondering what your future of your church is looking like and how can you survive on tithes and offerings, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that, how you can help grow the generosity and giving within your church. Or if you're ready to begin to pursue alternative revenue streams, you're not sure what that looks like, be glad to have a conversation with you about that and see how I could help come alongside you and your church in that journey. And maybe you're saying yes to all those things, and I do need to create income outside the church as well. Then I'd love to have that conversation with you also and be able to see how I could come alongside and help you in this season of your life and ministry with your church. So be looking forward to more of those things here on future episodes of the More Than a Pastor show, and some new resources I'll be providing that'll help you be able to begin to dive into some of those things that we just shared. So that's it for today's show. Thanks again for joining me. It's been a blessing to have you here, and I'd love to get your feedback. You can feel free to send me an email at rich@morethanapastor.com. And if you've got some questions or thoughts or encouragement in any of those things, I'd be glad to hear from you. Again, that's rich@morethanapastor.com. Well, hey, again, that's it for this show. Until next time, remember that you are more than a pastor. Saying yes to God's call doesn't mean you have to say yes to feeling stuck, broke, or unfulfilled in your life and ministry. Let's work together and help you create the life, impact, and income that you were made for.